My name is Luke Robert Mason. I'm the host of the Futures podcast, but today I am your moderator for this panel on Beyond Mortality. Now, if you have any questions for our esteemed panelists, please put them into the YouTube live chat now. I will try to get around to as many questions as possible. And I want to start by talking about this. Despite the boundless optimism found at Humanity Plus Summit, it does feel like we're at a point where multiple futures have collapsed in on themselves. This was perhaps most obvious over the course of one weekend in the last month when we saw the United States of America reignite their manned mission to space. Meanwhile, back here on terra firma, a black man was unjustly murdered, sparking some of the most impassioned protests that we've seen in modern history. Both events occurred in no more than 10 minutes, and both have had a massive impact on how we feel about our collective future. Not forgetting that all of this happened against the backdrop of a global pandemic that has revealed many of the challenges that come with having to quickly and effectively mobilize resources around tackling existential threats to humanity. COVID-19 is a unique moment that all transhumanists should learn from. It's all well and good to demand what could have been done with better technology, but now it's time to take a deep look at what has been done. Doing so reveals exactly how governments feel when it comes to thinking about their population's mortality. For example, the dominance of a herd immunity doesn't bode well for those of us who want to cure the disease of aging. Indeed, if the American response is anything to go by, it seems like death is a necessary sacrifice we must make. In this specific case, it was pretty clear that human life has been relegated to second place behind the need to ensure the survival of the economy. So, if transhumanists want us all to live longer, they sure as hell better have a good economic argument for it. And on that note, I want to kick off this panel, and I want to ask them, what do you think this response, or the response that we've seen to this global pandemic, what do you think it's taught you about how a population might respond to a problem such as the disease of aging?
Okay, if I get to start, I was astonished how good the scientists were at essentially realizing I can't go to my lab and work on my normal project, but I can work on COVID. So a lot of them just started joining forces. A lot of the people at the Future Humanity Institute who normally deal with other domains realized, oh, we should help our epidemiologists. Oh, the super forecaster can plug their stuff into the models. And I'm kind of running behind the young researchers and kind of saying, yes, that's good work. Keep up doing that. So the science community has done a lot of good stuff, even though it has slipped up. So we have one good grade here. I think the international science community has stepped up well. The governments, because they did all sorts of things differently, we actually got good data. So from a science standpoint, oh, this is wonderful. I'm right now sitting in the control group of Scandinavia, Sweden, where we didn't do any interventions. Comparing to Finland and Norway, we're getting good data. Unfortunately, people are actually dying because of that. So I do think we have a rather strong indictment of governance. And my final point is, we also have historical evidence that we tend to forget about these dreadful things shockingly quickly. In 1918, just a few months after the end of that flu pandemic, people were already noticing, haven't we forgotten something? Aren't people rather blithe about what was happening over the past few months? And then everybody forgot about it up until now. So we have a duty to try to remember this. We actually, given past experience, know we are likely to try to forget this dreadful episode, and we must not. We can learn from it. We can build monuments, we can set up emergency systems, and we can demand better governance of pandemics.
I think that's a good point, Anders. And I think as transhumanists, we tend to think about the future a lot, but to really understand the future, of course, you have to understand the past. And yes, maybe 1918 has the excuse of World War I that might be a little bit distracting as well. But we don't really have that excuse right now. And people have forgotten or aren't really aware of MERS and SARS and Ebola and all this stuff. We've had Bill Gates gave talks years ago warning that this was going to happen. Quite a few people have, so it's not like it should have been a surprise. But of course, nobody wants to take responsibility because it would mean distracting from other things that seem more urgent, even though it's clear that this is going to happen within some generation or two. So I think it's probably incumbent on us as transhumanists to present this historical perspective as well as the future. Look, this happened in the past, it's going to happen in the future. We have to have more resilient systems. We have to connect up our experts better. It's good that we're now doing genetic engineering on vaccines, that's speeding that up, but we really have to improve communication. We have to look at the problem that we get conflicting messages from official bodies. No, don't wear masks. Yes, wear masks. I mean, get the story straight and be consistent, because you lose all your authority if you keep changing because, well, we want to save. If you just say we want to save the mask for the medical workers, say that. Don't say you shouldn't wear masks and then change your mind. So there's a lot of things that I think we have to condense the lessons. And as you say, we're learning a lot, and it's still very early on. We can't really say what the best means are at this point. There's a lot of very uncertain data.
Yeah, I think there are several lessons I see in humanity's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, one is, a positive message regarding the compassion that people have for even those who are not directly economically productive. I mean, COVID-19 has been more fatal for the elderly than anybody else. But the overwhelming reaction, it isn't, well, that's all right, they're going to die anyway, let all the old people die, right? I mean, the overall reaction is, no, this is serious. We don't want to spread the virus to even like 80-year-old people. So I mean, there's been a real compassionate willingness to undertake sacrifice for the good of others, which is interesting. I mean, it didn't have to go that way, right? And it's also highlighted a lot of weaknesses in our medical systems, obviously, and in our whole approach to medicine. I mean, the use of genetic engineering for vaccine discovery is cool and it's important. On the other hand, the fact that we've almost never discovered a vaccine from first principles without a huge amount of trial and error is kind of glaring, right? I mean, we still don't know what most of the T cells do in the immune system to any degree of precision. I mean, our systems biology understanding is very weak. And when you look at antivirals, I mean, we're just haphazardly sort of trying stuff and are arguing all over the place. We haven't really been deploying systems biology and AI and modern biology together to get an overall picture of the body's response to infectious disease, because it hasn't really suited the business model of the pharma industry as much as other focuses. And the final point I want to make is regarding William Gibson's bon mot that the future is here already, it's just not evenly distributed. I mean, we can see some of the danger of that in the impact of COVID-19 on elderly people in nursing homes. Like, the future has not been evenly distributed to nursing homes, right? I mean, these are technological backwaters. They haven't been organized and operated according to cutting edge technologies in so many different ways. And no one was paying attention to that because the residents weren't complaining about that. It didn't seem to matter, but now you see that it mattered, right? And I think, the same will hold a lot of other places, like all the corners of the world where we sort of haven't bothered to focus on doing our best and rolling out our best technologies. Like in the wrong circumstance, the fact that we haven't bothered to roll out our technologies into this or that corner of humanity is going to come out to be extremely problematic, even though it seemed not to in what we thought was the default reality. So I mean, yeah, we see humanity does have a compassionate heart in the end, but we've been just very erratic at deploying our science for overall understanding and at rolling out our technologies in all the parts of society that we really do care about. Now, whether this pandemic will wake us up to our collective stupidity in this regard is another question. I mean, there's a fairly strong historical precedent to suggest that once the vaccine comes out, everyone's going to be like, the hell with that will never happen again. But let's hope that's not entirely the case, and there's a little bit of lasting positive lesson learned.
Natasha.
I'd like to address, Luke, something that you said in your opening narrative. You provided the scenario where on one hand, a rocket ship was being launched. On the other hand, a person's life was endangered. And these were happening within a similar time frame. And I'm someone who does a lot of research using different social modalities and medias. And the largest one is television. And a lot of young people do not watch television, so the message is not getting sent to them through the medium that is most effective about wearing masks and social distancing. So we know that the highest number of cases have been within that 20, 21-year-old to say 40. So we need to be better about our messaging system. Number 2 point I'd like to make is that I have never seen a group of people more impassioned about humanity than transhumanists. And that is definitely outside religious and spiritual groups. And it does not include political groups because I don't see a passion there for humanity within politics. I see a passion for winning, winners and losers, and pitting one side against the other. But taking a look at this core issue of what it means to be human and to have a humane sensibility about, yay, hooray, we're going off into space, and damn it, someone is killed again. This is critical, it's crucial, and it is crazy that these are allowed to happen. Not only that these 2 incidents happened and were mentioned in different vehicles, media vehicles, that were not recognizing the other. So while I hope that there are no more deaths by the police or any group against someone else, because death is simply wrong, and to commit a crime of death without self-defense is simply wrong. There needs to be a better understanding of not finding these divides. So your opening narrative established a divide from the get-go. And I want to remove that divide and take a look at it. Yes, on the one hand, it's great about X Prize. It's great that we're going out into space. It's great that we're looking at building communities, environments, education, institution opportunities off planet and on planet. And yes, it's horrible, it's critical. It ought never happen that any group gang up against another group irresponsibly. So that is not within the transhumanist community, that is outside the transhumanist community, that is in the world collective of humanity and humans in the way we think. Ben's last point I want to parrot from is that unless and until people understand a more humane, conscious awareness, these particular incidents that you addressed in your opening narrative will continue. So the aim, therefore, is the fundamental core of the Transhumanist Manifesto, the Declaration, and the philosophy. And that seeks beyond these bottom-dwelling attitudes and behaviors that will keep us from surviving and from evolving.
And I agree, Natasha. I mean, my argument really was that these things are happening simultaneously. And right now, the transhumanist community exists within the human community. And what we've seen happen in response to COVID-19 has, on one hand, been a healthcare response, but on the other hand, been a political response, which made me think of you guys and made me think about the transhumanist community and the way in which they're advocating for this end of death, especially when we began to see protests in the US that were demanding, give me liberty or give me death. So death to a large amount of the population was actually an okay option. We didn't see give me liberty or give me longevity. So what do you think we've learned from how the general public has approached this idea of their own mortality, and what can transhumanists
I'll answer that just very briefly because I'd rather my astute colleagues take this a step further. Wow. You know, it's give me liberty or give me life, give me what, you know, all these salvos. What we're seeing is at the very core of being human is this emotionality, whether that stems from the reptilian brain, the fight or flight, wherever it comes from, individual or as a species, that is almost like the ingredient that is a worse pandemic than anything else. outside of death. The emotional, illogical, irrational anger that we've seen in these gatherings, in these mob scenes, and not only that, it's the mob mentality and how that affects people without any sense of what it's all about, and not listening to, even within their communities, the skilled thinkers who are saying, calm down, relax, stop this. So then it says, what is really happening? Is it that people have felt this cabin fever so strongly that they'll do anything to get out of the house and cause a ruckus? So let me pass it on to my colleagues.
So there is an important and dangerous myth, and that is the myth of mass panic. Many people believe that if there is a dangerous situation, people will immediately start rioting. And this is a reason why a lot of decision makers think that, oh, we need to keep the information from the public because otherwise chaos ensues. But it's a myth. All the sociological research shows that actually when there is a disaster, people become very well behaved. In fact, we care more about our neighbors. If there is trouble, we generally tend to band together. This is the nice part of human tribalism. The problem is, of course, when people lose hope, then they start turning nasty. And empirically, we know this from various disasters, that when it looks like this is not going to end, there is no real progress. At that point, people turn nasty. And I can totally imagine that some of these psychological factors have been acting over the weeks and months. And part of that is, of course, maybe that the political decision makers and also medical decision makers have been relatively bad at showing that we're doing progress here. Yeah, this is going to take a while. You need to trust us on that. But we're actually getting somewhere. Hope is a very important ingredient. The problem is, of course, that we as humans, first of all, many of us are badly informed. And many of us also prefer to cleave to our group. And then we make up explanation why my group is so totally right. And when we get the normal battery of cognitive biases buttressing our ideas, which means that we get into trouble. One of the most cheering things I noticed about the whole COVID pandemic has been these big debates about data gathering, epidemiology. The armchair epidemiologist is probably the hero of our age. Yeah, a lot of armchair epidemiologists are wrong, but people are bickering about evidence standards. Over in Sweden, the most famous Swede right now is Anders Tegnell, the chief epidemiologist of Sweden. My brother has a poster of him on his bathroom door. A copy of Obama poster saying wash your hands and the stern visage of epidemiology. And people are arguing about whether his methodology and modeling was right or wrong. So this is something we can build on. The problem that is happening is, of course, that eventually you need to have an understanding inside society of where do we want to go, or at least an agreement to disagree. And that is something we have become worse at. We think COVID is a shared moment we can actually use as an example to start thinking about how do we actually set up society we can handle, even though we do disagree about some profound things.
I'd like to make the point that, right now I'm reading a lot of discussions about COVID and, what the best policies are, what's good, what's bad, what works and what doesn't. I think one thing that we can maybe try to communicate is a bit more of a meta level. Is to say, look, okay, these are important discussions if we don't get too tribal about them, but let's realize that this could have been a hell of a lot worse. Yeah. We got off pretty easy compared to how it could have been. Imagine if we had something as deadly as Ebola combined with something a lot more infectious and something with, say, a even longer latency period, so it gets spread to a lot of people before there are any symptoms. We could have wiped out half the population. So I think we need to say that let's cool it a little bit on these specific arguments, did this work, did that, and realize that it could be a lot worse. And it still could be a lot worse. There's going to be something else coming up anytime. We don't know when. It could be worse than the Spanish flu. It could be worse than in the Middle Ages. So we need to get our SHIT together and really try to organize our institutions better and, do some postmortems on the CDC and the WHO and all the other organizations that didn't do the best job.
This has been a dress rehearsal.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Let's just figure another quick point, sort of bouncing off something that Nell was saying, which I agree with very much. It was interesting. She was talking about the importance of vitamin D, or vitamin D to you Americans. And what's curious is I've seen a lot of experts dismiss that. These official sites debunking, they say, no, that doesn't work. Well, and then you look at the methodology and they just aren't really well informed. I think that is very important. And there are other things like thymic regeneration that life extensionists, transhumanists know more about. There's a lot of possible treatments that are of interest to transhumanists for life extension, which would also be very good for resistance against disease for everybody, particularly the elderly. If you could regenerate their thymus, it would be a lot more cost effective than putting on ventilators and intensive care. It'd be a heck of a lot more cost effective. So we could persuade whether it's insurers, companies, governments, if they're going to spend money, spend it on something that's going to improve immune systems. That's the most important thing we could do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of truth there, and I think if we look at the epidemiological modeling side, as Anders was talking about, I mean, we've been looking a bunch within SingularityNet at agent-based modeling to try to do in-depth modeling of different scenarios, and the estimation of the impact of different policies. And I mean, if you look at what would be possible with taking all the data that we're now gathering about our societies, and let alone data that big tech companies have from smartphones and so forth, if you fed all this data in a secure, privacy-preserving way, which we have technology for, and you fed it into intelligent agent-based models, I mean, you could actually come up with rational answers to questions like, should we open schools half day or full day now? Or does it really make sense to allow outdoor seating in restaurants only 50% capacity? I mean, all these little decisions that are regulating our everyday lives, there exist computational methodologies to leverage existing data to answer these in a far more rational way. But are we deploying them that way? No, these decisions are being made sort of quasi-randomly based on the seat of some politician's pants, or what they think people will tolerate, or kind of what seems to make sense. And I mean, there's sort of no need for it. And you look at what happens in our society. I mean, Google doesn't decide to move a single pixel on their web page based on intuition pulled out of someone's butt, right? I mean, they put each pixel on their web page based on all sorts of statistical science. But in determining how our everyday lives are regulated and how our healths are regulated, it's intuitive, very primitive, non-scientific decision making. And as was pointed out, you could view this as a dress rehearsal. Like, what if something much more severe happens, which on the whole feels at least moderately likely before we get to the singularity, right? I mean, in that case, are we still going to be going by the seat of the politician's pants, or are we going to take all the data that we've collected, integrate it in a secure way, and apply like AI and intelligent agent-based modeling to figure out what policies should be undertaken? I don't know what the answer is, actually. I mean, I'm not sure if society will get its crap together after this or not. And I am, as a longtime transhumanist, I'm an optimist in the sense I think it's extremely likely we're going to get to a beneficial singularity, and then we're going to have abundance. On the other hand, how much mayhem, death, and destruction and suffering happens between here and there, I mean, this is much less obvious, and we have reasons for both optimism and pessimism, as has been pointed out, observing the recent response to COVID-19.
Well, what I'm trying to get you guys to do is actually look at how the public response to COVID might actually be telling us something about the public response to ending aging. And survival in the age of COVID came with certain social constraints, and in large parts of the US and in the UK, survival came with this idea of lockdown. So I guess my question to the panel is, what if longevity came with social constraints? For example, what if you could promise a longer lifespan, but in order to do that, that person would need to isolate at home to avoid exposure to others? Would you potentially do that?
I think that's
I'm already doing it. No, I'm teasing. Go ahead.
I mean,
Go ahead, Ben.
there's a lot of crazy science fictional scenarios that you could put out there. And I mean, that reminds me of all these academic philosophy scenarios of like, you have 3 babies, 2 old people under one train, and then 2 elephants, a dog, a priest, and a rabbi under the other train. And which one do you save? And I mean, in the end, society doesn't tend to throw those things at you. I think that the psychological lesson to me is more like, we care about whatever's immediate and right in front of our face, right? And and whatever we haven't habituated to put up with. And aging for most of us is going to happen a fairly long time in the future, and we're used to that idea, so we don't care. COVID was a surprise; we weren't expecting it, and plus it could hit sort of any of us right now, or at least that was thought more so, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, before we knew how the fatality was biased towards certain populations. So I mean,
Look, I'll jump in here just for a quick second, but I think that, you know, your analogy with lockdown and living longer and how to protect, I think many of us are already doing that. For example, as we age, unfortunately, things happen to our bodies and happen to our neurological makeup, as Anders Wells knows. And you have to be constantly doing your own biomarking. So that's when we talk about COVID-19, we're talking about people taking self-responsibility. Wear your mask and social distance. If they're not doing it, don't go Karen on them. You know, just keep your sensibility about you and just do what you think is best for you. So don't go to places where it's spreading. So as someone who is very involved in ageless thinking and radical life extension, I have eliminated some of the risks I might have taken at an earlier time in my life, when maybe I'd jump out of an airplane or ski down a double diamond slope and Telluride, or, you know, all the wild, crazy things that I used to do. I have limited those because they do not match my chronological age or my commitment to living a long and healthy life. Thank you.
I would say just a quick comment on what you were saying, Luke, if I could. I think it's, you know, Ben was kind of pointing out these are like the philosopher's analogies or the science fiction stories. I think it's actually pretty hard to find a parallel example with longevity. The only one I can kind of think of, which I think is based on poor assumptions, is if everybody lives indefinitely, then what about population? Would you have to restrain people from having so many children? I think that's the only one that's at all plausible. I don't think it's that plausible because of you know, falling population growth rates and moving into cyberspace, et cetera, et cetera. But that's only kind of the one I can only think of that's really remotely plausible. So I think it's hard to find a close analogy to what you're saying. But maybe I just lack imagination.
The issue with the pandemic is it hits and spreads very fast, and society doesn't have time to rapidly adapt. Because if you think about it, if something like COVID-19 was just the default, I mean, we'd all be wearing masks all the time. We'd be used to it. And we would design different ventilation systems in nursing homes. And, you know, we would get our needs met in a way that didn't spread that virus. The issue is this sort of thing hits without time to adapt your mind or your physical infrastructure to it. So, I mean, if all death and disease were wiped out immediately, I mean, certainly there would be various disruptions in society. Still not as fast as with COVID, but there would be disruptions to attend to. But I think the nature of it is we're going to be rolling out longevity technologies bit by bit. It's not going to hit like in a week where it sweeps everyone. And I think we're going to be able to, you know, people's minds will adapt, and we will adjust society to that fact. I honestly think people are going to have a harder time adapting to being economically useless. Like not dying, once you get over it, it'll be like, oh, woo, you mean I don't have to die? Great, I'd rather live for almost all people. On the other hand, a lot of people, apart from young people who haven't embarked on a career yet anyway, a lot of people are very wrapped up in their productivity and usefulness for, you know, generating wealth or serving in the economy as their sense of self-worth. And I have a feeling that's going to be a slightly more difficult adaptation, although there may still be a huge sense of relief, like, well, you mean I don't have to do tedious and annoying things every day when I wake up in the morning just to keep food and shelter. Wow, like that's a huge relief. So my feeling is abundance and the end of death and disease, on the whole, will be greeted with a tremendous sense of relief and joy by almost all humans. I mean, of course, if you're making money and status by profiting from death, disease, and scarcity, then that may be experienced as bad. But on the other hand, even if that was the case, you're going to have abundance anyway. So you may get over it and start enjoying yourself.
Well, I think what we're going to do now is we're going to turn to a couple of the audience questions from the YouTube live chat. And I'm going to try and combine V, Richard, and Josie's question, which is a mix between a discussion of BCI, whole brain emulation, and nanotech. And really, at the heart of all of these questions, what they're asking is, surely disease and viruses, they won't be a problem if we just, leave the body behind and upload our minds into computers. Should we, in that case, pursue that sort of transhumanist future so that we won't have to deal with this stuff?
So I totally think we should be pursuing it. It's just that it's going to take quite a while. So, for example, I did a paper where I looked at my assumptions about when we're going to get brain emulation. I ended up with a probability distribution that you might or might not agree with, but I got kind of a median guess, something like 2070. Maybe I'm just a pessimist, but still, it's going to take a while. And brain emulation is a technology that I think we can predict fairly well. While artificial intelligence, atomically precise manufacturing, not to mention the powers of BCI, they are much more uncertain. So we end up with this very broad probability distribution. Maybe next week, Neuralink is going to do something awesome that turns out to be the solution in just a decade. Or maybe Google DeepMind will unveil a GPT free and beating the AI. But it could also take a century. So we have a problem that we actually don't know how close we are. And that means we need to pursue multiple lines of inquiry. We need to do the normal life extension stuff. We need to do the normal medicine. We should be pushing at all of these ones because we don't know which one is going to work the best. And some of them are probably going to synergize in lovely, lovely ways. So I think—
Yes, it's not a one size fits all. For example, some people may want to stay in their biobodies, but a certainly re-engineered biobody with a far less faulty genome. Others may want to upload and cross-load and download. So I think that the perspective that mind uploading or mind transfer is a sine qua non and that it's one way to go forgets the fact that the transhumanist agenda looks at a variety of opportunities and challenges, and that if you upload, you can certainly download and cross-load into another virtual environment or artificial environment. We're already seeing that with augmented reality and virtual reality and other interfaces that are being discussed. So I think it's really important that before we even get to the uploading, the most important thing now is that, and Max can probably pick this up and I'll stop in just a moment, but the continuity of identity. If you don't have your memories intact, then who are you? And that is so consequential to aging and mortality. So if we want to live a longer life, we need to keep our psychology, our psyche, our identity intact.
I'd like to answer the question a little differently, perhaps possibly more directly, depending what the intention was. I think the idea that we can avoid all these problems of infections and viruses and diseases by uploading could be a little bit over-optimistic. I mean, we don't really know how it's going to work right now, right? I mean, Anders, you're saying, the whole brain emulation is the thing we kind of understand the best because we already have a model that we're kind of working on duplicating. Doing it by other means, we don't really know how it's going to work. But the idea that if it's electronic, no viruses, I mean, that's just a non-starter, right? Every time we scream at our computer, what the hell are you doing? They're always having problems. They're very, very complex, and these be probably even more complex systems. So one thing we have to be very careful about. I mean, I don't want to have a brain that runs on Google platform or Microsoft platform or anybody's platform. Or open source would be a little worrying too. I don't know exactly what I want to run on, but I'd want a system that has extremely good virus proofing, can't be easily taken over. You can't just feed in suggestions or emotions that I didn't give permission to. I think that's going to be a very big issue, even more than it is currently with computers. So I don't think changing platform alone guarantees that. We should really design ahead for exactly that kind of problem. Whether it's the sort of AI in a box kind of system where you make things run through various simulations to test them out before you make any changes. There are a lot of approaches that you guys know better than I do, but no, it's not automatically going to solve these problems at all, except for biological viruses.
Well, it doesn't automatically solve the problem, Max, you're right. But as you allude to, moving to a platform that you have complete visibility into and complete engineering control over certainly opens up a lot of better possibilities. And if you look in the field of software now, I mean, there exist programming languages which have strong formal verifiability properties, and there's a whole science about this, but these are not the ones that are heavily used in practice, including not heavily used in most banking or military systems for that matter, but they do exist. And the development process is a little slower for most humans in these languages, and the computational cost is sometimes higher, though that's becoming less of a factor. But I think once we've shifted to having AIs do most of the programming, there'll be much less reason not to use languages with strong formal verifiability properties. So I think that the virus and bug issue per se, I mean, we can't say for sure, but I think that will be far less of a problem than it looks like it is now. And we've seen that curve in many other technologies. Like there are many technologies we use every day that don't break very often, and that broke a lot earlier in their development curve. Now, the other problem you mentioned of who controls the infrastructure, I mean, that's a whole different question, right? Do you have central control, or do you have more autonomous agent-based control where the nexuses of cognitive activity are more causal in terms of controlling the resources they're running on? I mean, that's by no means obvious, right? Because we're going toward more and more centralized and oligarchic control in human society now. I mean, some of us, as with my SingularityNet project, like we're trying to build underlying tools that will enable decentralized control of advanced AI systems or mind uploads or whatever it is. So we have the tools for a decentralized democratic, liberty and autonomy approach. We also have the tools for a more centralized dictatorial approach. And it's really a matter of where does the self-organizing process of our global brain take us, which is not entirely obvious, actually.
Right.
So in other words, computers can get viruses too, and if you thought lockdown was bad, think what it's going to be like being a brain locked into a server rack. I want to get us back to some of the discussion around longevity, and it's based on one of the questions that has just appeared in the YouTube live stream chat, which is about how we measure the progress that's being made in this field. Because back to some of your earlier points, the odd thing about COVID-19 is we don't give it attention, or viruses like this, we don't give it attention until it's directly in front of us. Well, could we flip that funnel, and could we actually use the communication of some of the positive and hopeful things that are happening in the longevity space to bring it to the forefront of the discussion? So how are we measuring longevity science currently, and how can we better communicate the advances in some of that science?
So one of the interesting things about longevity science is that it's so hard to measure aging, which is deeply annoying. It used to be simple. You just ask for the chronological age, but then we quickly realized, actually, unfairly enough, different people age at different rates. So they instead try to look, of course, for biomarkers of aging. And this is a big and somewhat controversial area about finding the right biomarkers. It's very easy to get the biogerontologists into a wonderful academic bickering about their favorite and least favorite biomarkers. I think we're getting there. We're finding these biomarkers for aging. Now, they are, of course, very interesting because they're also biomarkers for health in general. I think it's worth monitoring them, not just for checking our progress against the aging and what different interventions do, but we want to notice when our biomarkers start going off. So we might actually notice that, okay, maybe I got exposed to some weird virus. Maybe there is some chemical in my environment. Why do I always sneeze when I'm in that place? Is there some allergic reaction? Actually detecting stuff. That's the first step towards figuring out some science of it. But we need to be able to detect it. So good methods of getting biomarkers out of our bodies in an unobtrusive way is probably a very important thing. Right now, we're working on kind of checking for antibodies. We ought to scale that up, and we ought to be checking for all kinds of antibodies. And then we need to figure out a way of handling that flood of data, because it's going to cause lots of false positives. There is a lot of very cool statistical problems to solve for bright people here. It's not just a matter of hardware. It's a matter of data science and then policy. What can we do about it? If I detect my personal allergen in a particular spot, what do I do about it?
Anders, you touched on something very important. First off, self-responsibility. So Luke, going back to your general question, bringing it back to longevity, this has been a wake-up call for everyone. We are vulnerable. Vulnerable. There's no question about it. Doesn't matter the age, the amount of wealth, the ethnicity, the social status, none of that matters. We're all vulnerable as biological animals. That number one has been brought home to everyone. Maybe some people are hearing it better than others, but that's the fact. The second part that Anders just alluded to is the political aspect of it. We need better laws, better rules, better legislation, better lobbyists, better situation here in the United States with the FDA, and each country within the bureaus that are determining the rights of people to live long and healthy lives. So self-responsibility and more information education to those who make policies.
I think, Anders, that's really important. As I think Ben was alluding to, even if everyone was to become non-aging right now, you wouldn't really better tell right away, right? Take some time before you start noticing, hey, I haven't really changed that much in the last 5 years, so it wouldn't be something right in your face. I think aging clocks are probably one of the more promising ways to try and get across the results of various experiments. And for instance, I think Steve Horvath's work on methylation aging clocks was very promising, and some spin-offs of that. For instance, I did the thymic trial, where apparently over the 2 years of that trial, I got 2 years younger according to the methylation aging clock, which is good news. I think that kind of thing will help to make it more concrete. If you just try and describe the methodology of a study and this outcome and this outcome, people will just glaze over pretty quickly. But if you can say, we've got a nice DNA aging clock, this is what happened, that makes it easier for people to grasp. And it certainly makes it easier to test things without waiting for an entire lifetime of whatever species you're using.
To summarize, because we've only got a couple of minutes left before we have to end this panel, to summarize, I want to look at sort of how this pandemic has made us change our perception of healthcare, because it feels like in countries such as the US, we have a sick care system as opposed to a healthcare system. And I know, Ben, you covered a little bit of this in your presentation. Do you think, given everything that's happened with COVID-19, now is the time to start having this very, very important discussion about how we can look at preventative medicine as an important way of ensuring our survival into the future?
Yeah, I mean, this has been the default in China and throughout Asia in healthcare systems for a long time. And I think, the US in particular, the healthcare system is very twisted and screwed up in quite complex ways. So the big question to me is, what will the cultural impact be? I mean, if people's minds are woken up to thinking in that direction, then eventually the tortured and perverse process of the government will probably adapt through a long series of pain and suffering based processes, right? But I don't know whether that will be the case. I mean, there's certainly a decent probability once vaccines come out, people totally forget about it and go back to doing whatever they were before. But I think it will have an impact on kids who were growing up during this COVID pandemic. Like there's going to be something planted into their minds about human frailty and public health. I mean, just as kids like me who grew up in the Vietnam War era, all that had some impact in our minds, right? So implanting this into the cognome of the youth is interesting, and over a medium term, it may well have some impact in terms of making people more public health and preventive medicine minded.
I think one of the important things is incentives, as any economist will tell you. Incentives matter. The US, the so-called healthcare system, has really wrong incentives. But even right now over here in Sweden, with a rather excellent healthcare system, it's still got incentives to be sick care. The incentives, again, are not right. And I think Ben is right. We need to change the cognome of people. We need to realize, actually, I don't want sick care. I want a lot of health. And that means changing a bit of organization so the system actually promotes that. So you actually don't get to go to the hospital. Because right now, even well-functioning systems are not aiming at the right goal. We need to set the incentives for politicians and medical decision makers and researchers so they go for health.
So it feels like there's so much more still to cover, but we have reached the end of our time. And I want to thank our incredible panelists for giving us just a taste of perhaps where this discussion could go in the near future. And on that note, I want to hand back to Natasha Vita-More, who's going to take us through the rest of the Humanity Plus Summit.
Thank you, Luke. Excellent panel and moderation, intriguing and informative, and we could have gone on for hours.